They auctioned her off like cattle. In a dust-choked town where law bowed to wealth and women were currency, Hazel Patterson was not just another girl. She was a debt unpaid. The sheriff, slick with whiskey and self-righteousness, called her a sinner for the crime of her father's failures. With her wrists bound and her future hanging by the rusted gavel of a crooked courtroom, she was sentenced not to jail, but to servitude. Sold to the highest bidder to repay a debt she never owed. In the Old West, justice was as dry as the land, and Hazel, just 19, was condemned to a life owned by men who saw her as nothing more than flesh. But when all hope seemed lost, the outlaw stepped into the saloon, not the kind from storybooks, nor the kind that shot for sport. Owen Nightingale was wanted by the law, feared by men, and cursed by the preacher. But when he looked at Hazel, something shifted. He didn't see a servant or a sinner. He saw a storm, silent, wounded, waiting to rise. In front of the sheriff, in front of the crowd, Owen drew his gun not to kill, but to claim. "She's my wife, or she's my war," he said, daring the town to choose. And in that instant, a fire was lit, not of violence, but of defiance. It was the beginning of a romance no one could predict, forged in injustice, bound by survival, and fated to change everything. Hazel Patterson had never been allowed to dream. Born into dust and debt, her mother died birthing her, and her father drowned his grief in gambling and rot-gut whiskey. By 16, she'd buried more hope than most women twice her age. She knew how to clean wounds, patch roofs, and hide tears. What she didn't know was love, not from a man, not even from herself. The sheriff saw her as property. The townsfolk saw her as a burden. And when the gavel fell, no one raised a voice. Hazel was forgotten, except by the man watching from the shadows. Owen Nightingale was a man of ghosts. Once a decorated war scout, now branded outlaw, he roamed from territory to territory, leaving behind stories stitched in blood and justice. But under the dust-covered hat was a man who'd seen too much and carried it all in silence. He didn't believe in God, but he believed in mercy. And when he saw Hazel, trembling in chains, something ancient stirred in him. He hadn't come to this town to save anyone, but he wasn't leaving it without her. What began as a rescue would ignite a journey neither of them expected, one that would challenge who they were and who they dared to become. The sun over Dry Creek burned like Judgment Day, and Hazel Patterson stood at the center of it all, her wrists tied, her head held high out of sheer defiance. Her father had died 2 weeks prior, leaving nothing but unpaid debts and a tarnished name. In the Old West, that was all it took to bury a woman alive in chains. Sheriff Mort Clemens, a man known more for his boots than his Bible, strode out onto the wooden porch of the courthouse, chewing tobacco and justice in equal measure. "Indentured servitude," he declared, like he was handing down scripture. "Until her father's debt is paid, this girl belongs to the town." The townspeople didn't flinch. Some even nodded. Hazel's stomach turned. Not a single soul stepped forward to defend her. That silence would become the day's loudest verdict. They paraded her through the main street like a prize hog, and bidders whispered among themselves like vultures picking at bones. One man, a merchant who owned the general store, offered a year's grain supply. Another, the blacksmith, grunted out a bid in horseshoes and whiskey. Hazel didn't cry. She didn't blink. But deep inside, her spirit began to unravel, thread by invisible thread. She was 19. She wanted to teach children, plant a garden, maybe even find someone to love. But in Dry Creek, women like her didn't have futures, only functions. Her voice had never mattered before. Why would it now? From the shadows beneath the saloon's awning, Owen Nightingale leaned on a post, watching the auction unfold. He hadn't come for justice. He didn't believe in it anymore. He'd seen it twisted and used like a whip too many times. But this, selling a woman like livestock, that was something else. something personal. The wind caught Hazel's hair, and in that instant she turned and met his gaze. No words passed between them, just a look, fierce, cornered, human. Owen felt something shift inside him, not pity, not desire, recognition. She was like him, bruised by the world but not broken by it. He stepped forward. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, and the sheriff's hand instinctively went to his holster. Owen's boots thudded against the wooden planks of the auction platform. "I'll take her," he said. "You can't," the sheriff snapped. "She's not yours." Owen's eyes narrowed. He unbuttoned his duster just enough to show the glint of a revolver resting against his ribcage like a promise. "Then make her mine." Gasps scattered through the crowd. "She's my wife," he added slowly. "Or she's my war." The sheriff froze. Everyone had heard the stories of Owen Nightingale, the outlaw who walked out of massacres untouched, the man who left entire pauses shaking in their boots. And now he stood here, not asking, but daring. Hazel couldn't breathe. This man, this stranger, was throwing down his life for hers. She didn't know why, didn't know him. But when he reached out his hand, everything in her screamed to take it. So she did. He pulled her into the saddle, swung up behind her, and with one kick, they rode. Gunfire echoed behind them, but Owen never looked back. He held her like the whole town was chasing them, and maybe it was. But Hazel had never felt freer than in that moment, galloping away from chains. What she didn't know was that freedom came with a cost, and love, if this could ever become that, had a war to survive first. She thought the hardest part was behind her, but what waited beyond Dry Creek would test more than her courage. It would test her soul. The wind howled across the plains like a chorus of ghosts. As the sun dipped behind the hills, Owen and Hazel reached a rocky bluff overlooking the valley. Below, a modest ranch lay hidden. A crooked fence, a half-collapsed barn, and a cabin barely holding itself together. Owen dismounted first, offering Hazel his hand again. She hesitated this time. The adrenaline had faded, and now the questions crept in like snakes. Who was this man? Why had he risked everything? "You're safe here," Owen said quietly. "For now." She took his hand, again, and stepped into the unknown, where safety came wrapped in silence and the scent of worn leather and pine smoke. Inside the cabin, the air was thick with history. Old rifles lined the walls. A faded photograph sat on the mantel. A woman and a child, both long gone. Hazel didn't ask. Owen didn't offer. Instead, he lit a fire, set a pot of beans to boil, and unrolled a blanket in the corner for her. No words of comfort, no promises, just presence. It was more than she'd ever been given. As she sat by the fire, her mind spun. She was free, but not free. Rescued, but not whole. And this man, this outlaw named Owen Nightingale, was not her savior. He was something else. A mirror, a storm, a question she hadn't learned to ask. Owen watched her from across the room, not with lust or pity, but with a quiet respect that unnerved her. He could see the weight she carried, even if she refused to show it. He'd known women like her before, hardened by silence, trained to survive. But Hazel had something different. Fire. It flickered beneath the surface, behind the way she stared into the flames like she was daring them to speak. She wasn't a victim. She was an ember waiting for wind. And Owen, though he didn't say it, had come to believe that maybe, just maybe, he was that wind. Over the next few days, Hazel began to rebuild not just her strength, but herself. She helped patch the fence, fed the horses, learned how to handle a rifle. Each task was small, but together they stitched a rhythm, a quiet, stubborn kind of healing. Owen didn't hover, he didn't coddle, but he was always near, always watching. When she fell, he didn't reach down. He waited for her to rise, and when she did, he nodded. That was how they spoke. without words, without promises. Hazel started to feel something she hadn't felt in years. Control. Of her body, of her breath, of her future. One night, after a thunderstorm rolled through, they sat on the porch and listened to the rain drip from the eaves. Hazel turned to Owen and asked the question that had burned since the day he saved her. "Why did you do it?" He didn't answer right away. "Because no one else would," he said. She wanted more. She needed more. But that was all he gave. And yet, in that silence, she felt something settle between them, like a seed in dry earth, waiting for time. Neither of them knew it, but something was growing. Not love, not yet, but something deeper. And it was about to be tested in ways neither of them could imagine, because the sheriff wasn't the kind of man to forget. And he wasn't the only one looking for Owen Nightingale. It started with hoofbeats. Distant at first, barely more than a tremor across the dry earth. But Owen felt it in his bones. Trouble was coming. By the time the dust rose on the horizon, he already had Hazel inside, rifle loaded, eyes scanning the ridge. "Stay low," he told her, voice calm as iron. "Don't come out unless I call." Hazel's heart pounded. She wasn't the girl on the auction block anymore, but she wasn't ready for war either. Still, she nodded, clutching the revolver he'd taught her to use, and hid behind the stove, eyes wide in the dim light. 3 men rode in, black hats, hard eyes, spurs that sang like snakes. Bounty hunters, not amateurs. These were men who tracked wolves, not rabbits. One of them, lean with a scar down his cheek, spat in the dirt and said Owen's name like a curse. "Owen Nightingale," he drawled. "You got something that don't belong to you." Owen didn't flinch. "She don't belong to anyone," he said. "That's the problem." Guns twitched in holsters. Tension crackled like lightning in the air. But Owen didn't draw. Not yet. He knew better than to waste bullets on words. Hazel could barely breathe. She pressed herself tighter into the corner, wishing she could disappear. But then she remembered Owen's voice from 2 nights before, steady as a mountain. "You're not weak. You're just used to being told you are." Something snapped. Not fear, but fury. She wasn't going to be cargo again. Not going to be a debt or a possession. Quietly she crept toward the back window, keeping low, heart thundering in her throat. She didn't know what she was going to do, only that she had to do something. Outside, Owen made his move. Fast, sharp, final. He shot the first man before the others could blink. The second reached for his weapon, but dropped dead before his fingers found it. The third ran, coward or survivor. Owen didn't care. Hazel burst out the back door just in time to see the last horse disappear into the dusk. She was shaking, but not from fear, from adrenaline, from something new. She walked straight to Owen, stood before the bodies, and didn't look away. "Teach me," she said. "Next time I want to fight beside you." Owen looked at her, not the way a man looks at a woman, but the way one soldier looks at another. And he nodded. They buried the men at dawn, said no words, just shoveled dust over dust and walked back to the cabin hand in hand, silent as the grave. Hazel knew then that survival wasn't just about running, it was about standing. And that this place, this broken ranch, wasn't just Owen's anymore. It was theirs. She felt it in her bones. But peace in the West was always borrowed, and the man coming for them next wasn't after a bounty. He was after vengeance. The days stretched long, framed by blue sky and broken fences. Owen repaired the barn beam by beam, and Hazel learned to ride not just for escape, but for control. Every morning she saddled the mare with steady hands, galloping across the fields like she belonged to the horizon. And slowly, she began to. The ranch, once a place of hiding, became a place of becoming. She planted lavender near the porch. She wrote names on the corral posts, names of horses, names of memories. Owen watched from a distance, never pushing, never asking, just witnessing her unfold. At night, they sat beside each other like two old souls with too much past between them. Hazel told him about her father, not with bitterness but with a kind of hollow acceptance. "He tried," she said, "but trying ain't the same as protecting." Owen nodded. He didn't speak of his past, but Hazel saw it in the scars along his ribs, in the way he flinched at thunder, in the silence that followed when she mentioned war. They didn't need to confess everything. Some stories spoke loudest in what was left unsaid. Their relationship grew like roots beneath the surface, quiet, invisible, unshakable. He fixed a locket chain she hadn't worn since her mother's death. She stitched the sleeve of his coat after a barbed wire tear. Small things, weightless things. But in the Old West, survival was made of those quiet gestures. There was no proposal, no vows, no preacher. But one morning, Owen carved her name into the porch rail, and beside it, his. Hazel traced the letters and didn't cry. "Looks like we got married after all," she whispered. Owen kissed her hand. "Wasn't no other way." But peace never lasted long. One evening, a stranger rode up the path, no badge, no bounty, but with eyes too cold for a drifter. He asked for water. Owen didn't say no, but his hand never left his belt. The man drank, tipped his hat, and rode on. But something about him stuck like splinters. Hazel felt it too. A shadow had entered their world, and it hadn't come to pass through. It had come to wait. That night, as wind whispered through the windows, Hazel had a dream. A red sky, Owen's body broken at the edge of the barn, a fire consuming the lavender she planted. She woke with a scream in her throat. Owen held her, not asking what she saw. He didn't need to. Danger had a scent, and it was already in the air. They began to prepare, not for flight, but for siege. Hazel insisted. "I won't run again," she told Owen, her jaw tight as a coiled rope. He didn't argue. Instead, he taught her how to lay a trap, how to listen for footsteps in the wind, how to wait without blinking. She practiced at dawn, rifle on shoulder, firing into burlap sacks filled with hay and stones. At first, she missed. Then she learned to breathe, to steady her aim, to feel her body as a weapon instead of a target. She was no longer the girl from Dry Creek. She was something else now, something steel. They fortified the ranch piece by piece, stacked stones, dug ditches, greased hinges, counted bullets. Owen found an old map in the loft and showed her the escape routes through the canyon. "In case things go bad," he said. Hazel burned the map. "We don't leave," she answered. "Not again." Her voice didn't tremble, and Owen, for the first time in years, felt something he didn't know he still could. Pride. She had been a symbol of injustice once. Now she was a force of it. And it made him believe maybe love wasn't always soft. Sometimes it was forged like iron, one fire after another. But not all battles come with a warning. Late one afternoon, as they sat mending the porch rail, a hawk circled overhead, then dove into the canyon with a shriek. Hazel paused. Someone's here. She was right. Moments later, the silence broke. A single shot rang out, echoing off the cliffs, and the barn roof exploded into splinters. Hazel and Owen dove for cover, rolling behind the water trough as more shots cracked through the valley. Snipers, 2, maybe 3. Trained, precise, not bounty hunters, professionals, hired guns. The next hour was survival. They crawled from shelter to shelter, moving like shadows, returning fire only when the sun hit just right. Hazel took down one of them with a clean shot from behind the hay bales. Her hands didn't shake. Her eyes didn't blink. When she saw the man fall, something in her changed forever. Not guilt, not triumph, just silence, like the world had turned a page. Owen reached her side, looked her over for wounds, and for the first time, didn't shield her from what came next. "That was war," he said, "and you stood." When the smoke cleared, only one of the attackers remained. Tied to a post, bruised and cursing, he refused to speak, until Hazel leaned in, eyes colder than any winter. "Who sent you?" she asked. He spit blood. "The sheriff's got friends," he muttered, "and someone's paying good to see you both buried." Owen stiffened. Hazel didn't flinch. She'd known this was coming, but hearing it aloud changed everything. They weren't just running from Dry Creek anymore. They were running from a system, a chain of power that didn't like women who said no, or men who said mine and meant it. The question now wasn't if they could survive. It was how far the fire would spread before someone stopped it. The next morning, the prisoner was gone. Not escaped, executed. A bullet to the head, precise and silent. No struggle, no tracks. Owen found him slumped against the fence, mouth open to the dust. Hazel stood beside the body, fists clenched. "They wanted to send a message," she said, "that we're not alone, even when we think we are." Owen nodded, but the worry behind his eyes deepened. Whoever was pulling the strings had eyes on the inside. Maybe from town, maybe closer. Hazel stepped back and looked at the hills. "Then we send one back." It wasn't a question. They rode into Dry Creek at dusk, under cloaks and silence, like ghosts haunting their own past. Hazel returned to the saloon, the same one where she had first seen Owen. But now, she didn't wait in the shadows. She walked to the bar, straight-backed and unshaken. The sheriff wasn't there, but his deputy was. A weasel of a man with a mustache that twitched when he lied. "Tell your boss," she said, loud enough for the room to hush, "if he sends men again, I won't bury them next time. I'll leave them on the road." Owen stood behind her, hand on his gun, face unreadable. No one moved, not a soul. They left with eyes watching their backs, but no one followed. At the edge of town, Owen stopped her horse. "You didn't have to do that," he said. Hazel turned, meeting his gaze. "Yes, I did. I'm not just hiding behind your gun, Owen. If we're going to survive, we do it together, or not at all." He looked at her then, like he was seeing her for the first time, not as someone he saved, but as someone he'd follow. A storm rolled on the horizon. Thunder cracked, and for a moment it felt like the sky itself had spoken the vows they never said aloud. That night, back at the ranch, Hazel couldn't sleep. She walked the perimeter in the dark, barefoot in the dust, listening to the owls and the rustle of leaves. Owen found her near the fence, staring out into nothing. "You think they'll come again?" she asked. "They will," he answered. "But they'll find something different this time." Hazel looked at him. "What's that?" He didn't blink. "A woman who knows what she's worth," she smiled faintly, then leaned into him. "And a man who finally believes he can stay." But somewhere far off, in a smoky room filled with lawmen, outlaws, and men whose money silenced guilt, the sheriff laid down a fresh map. On it, a red mark circled the ranch. "She made a mistake," he said to the stranger in the corner. "She didn't run." The man nodded once, then slipped his rifle into its case. This one wouldn't miss. And this time, there'd be no warning. Owen had always known the past would find him. He just didn't expect it to wear the face of his brother. It happened 3 days after their return from town. A horse galloped into the yard, wild and breathless, carrying a rider Hazel had never seen before. He dismounted like a soldier but smiled like a ghost. "Name's Elias," he said. "I reckon I'm owed a meal." Owen stepped out of the barn, his face going still as the wind died. "You're supposed to be dead," he muttered. "Yeah, well," Elias smirked. "You always were better at killing than knowing." Hazel watched them with narrowed eyes. The resemblance was clear, same jawline, same fire. But where Owen was weathered, Elias was slick, like charm polished by danger. They ate in silence. Elias talked. Owen didn't. Hazel listened. Stories of raids gone wrong, of betrayals in border towns, of stolen gold and stolen women. But beneath the bravado, Hazel sensed something else, a shadow. Elias wasn't just here to visit. He was here for something, and she wasn't wrong. That night, as thunder whispered beyond the hills, Elias knocked on their door. "That sheriff back in Dry Creek," he said. "He's offering a fortune for both your heads. Double, if you're brought in alive." Owen stared at him. "You came to collect?" Elias shrugged. "No, I came to warn you. But I might change my mind." Hazel didn't sleep. She watched Owen pace by the fire, jaw tight, fists clenched. "What happened between you?" she asked. "Everything," he said. "He betrayed me in Laredo, cost lives, friends." He didn't say more, but Hazel saw it, the hurt, the guilt, the rage. "Do you trust him?" she asked. "I don't even trust myself," Owen replied. That scared her more than any bullet. Because if Owen fell apart, everything would. And Elias knew that. He knew how to dig under skin, how to make blood boil, and he wasn't leaving anytime soon. Over the next few days, Elias made himself at home. He flirted with Hazel, whispered stories to the horses, cleaned his gun too often. Owen said nothing, but Hazel could see the storm rising in his eyes. Then, one night, she found Elias in the barn, writing something, coordinates maybe. She didn't confront him, not yet, but she told Owen. "If he stays, one of you will die," she said. Owen didn't answer, just stood there, staring at the fire, like it might offer a future he couldn't see anymore. "He's my brother," he said at last. "That's not a reason," Hazel whispered. "That's a warning." And the next morning, Elias was gone, without a goodbye, without a trace. But what he left behind would shatter everything. The sun rose blood red that morning, an omen Hazel felt before she saw it. Owen stood by the barn, staring at the horizon like it might confess something. Hazel joined him, heart heavy. Elias was gone, but not gone. The barn door hung crooked, the horses were restless, and in the far corner of the feed room, Owen found it, a saddlebag. Inside, maps of the canyon, marked trails, and a letter, signed by Elias. "They'll come at sundown, ride north, or die where you stand." Hazel read it twice. "He set us up." Owen didn't nod. He didn't have to. His silence screamed it. It wasn't just betrayal. It was design. Elias hadn't just brought a warning. He'd laid the foundation of their downfall. Owen's old enemies, the sheriff's new mercenaries, they would come in force, expecting a man broken by blood and a woman too stubborn to run. Hazel looked at the rifle, at her hands. "We stay?" she asked. Owen looked at her, really looked, and the weight in his eyes broke something in her. "We fight," he said, "because running never gave us peace, only scars." They spent the day turning the ranch into a fortress. Hazel moved with precision, shoveling trenches, rigging tripwires, preparing ammunition. Owen watched her, astonished, not at her skill, but at her resolve. She didn't flinch, didn't weep. "You're stronger than me," he told her once, almost in awe. Hazel wiped sweat from her brow and answered, "I've had to be." That night, they made no fire, no words, just sat in the dark, hands entwined, listening to the wind. Owen kissed her palm and whispered, "Whatever happens, I don't regret a second." Hazel smiled, "Then don't die on me." And then came the hooves. They heard them before they saw them, dozens, maybe more. Shadows moved across the hills like smoke with spurs. Hazel stood at the window, gun ready. Owen took position near the barn, every muscle coiled tight. This wasn't just survival. This was everything. The life they built. The love that hadn't been spoken aloud but lived in every glance. When the first shot rang out, Hazel fired back. No hesitation, no fear. and as the night exploded in gunfire, smoke and thunder, Owen shouted her name, not in warning, but in defiance. The fight had begun, but the war was just about to reveal its cruelest twist. The gunfire didn't stop. It raged through the night like a storm without rain. Hazel moved like she'd trained for this moment her whole life, covering Owen's blind spots, reloading with precision, keeping her breath steady even when her ears rang and the barn shook. For every man that charged the fence, 2 more followed. They weren't just there to kill, they were there to erase, to burn down the very idea of what Hazel and Owen had built. But neither of them flinched. They fought like people with nothing left to lose and everything to protect. Then came the silence. Not peace. Pause. The kind of quiet that smells like death. Owen crept from the barn, eyes sharp, rifle drawn. Hazel covered him from the porch, and that's when she saw it. A flicker behind the tree line, a glint of glass. Her voice caught in her throat. "Owen!" she screamed, just as the shot cracked through the air. He didn't fall. He turned. Too late. Hazel hit the ground. The bullet meant for him tore through her side, spinning her down the porch steps, blood blooming like red dust across her shirt. Owen didn't think. He ran, dropped the rifle, caught her in his arms. "Hazel, no, stay with me," he begged, voice ragged, trembling. She smiled through the pain. "Guess I made the vows real," she gasped. "For better or worse." He pressed his hand to the wound, panic rising like wildfire. "You hold on," he said. "You don't get to die, not now." Her eyes fluttered. "I'm not scared," she whispered. "I found you." From the trees, the shooter stepped out. It wasn't Elias, it was someone worse. The sheriff himself. Rifle still smoking, badge glinting in the moonlight, he walked toward them with calm cruelty. "Tried to teach that girl her place," he said. "But some women don't learn until you put them down." Owen rose, slow, shaking with something beyond rage. The sheriff raised his rifle again. "She was never yours," he sneered. Owen didn't reach for his gun. He didn't have to. Hazel's hand, slick with blood, slid a revolver into his. "Mine, or war," she rasped, and with that, Owen fired. But the sheriff wasn't alone. And the final move on the board hadn't yet been played. Owen didn't hesitate. The moment Hazel passed him the revolver, he fired, clean, deadly, final. The sheriff's body jerked once, then crumpled in the dirt like a broken promise. Blood pooled beneath the badge he had polished for pride, not principle. Owen dropped to his knees beside Hazel, hands frantic, voice breaking. "Stay with me! Hazel, look at me! Please!" But her eyes were dimming, her breath thin like wind through canyon rocks. "You saved me," she whispered. "Again." He shook his head. "No. You saved me. Every damn day." But there was no time to mourn. From the hills came more hooves. Mercenaries sent by the sheriff before his death. Owen gathered Hazel in his arms, blood soaking both their clothes. He ran for the barn, kicked open the trapdoor beneath the hay where they'd stored their last chance, an old wagon, a secret path, and a final hope. He laid her down gently, wrapped her wound tight, kissed her forehead. "Don't leave me," he said, not like an outlaw, but like a man who had finally found home in the heart of a woman too strong to break. They rode through the back trail, the wagon bouncing through rocks and roots, Hazel fading in and out of consciousness. Owen drove like the devil was on their tail, because he was. Gunshots echoed behind them, but he didn't look back. He couldn't. "Just a little longer," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "You're not allowed to die. You hear me? Not after everything." Hazel stirred. "I'm tired," she said. "Then sleep," he whispered, holding her tighter. "But not forever." When they reached the canyon's edge, Owen saw it, a circle of riders blocking the path. No more running, no more tricks. just steel and fire, and the truth of who they were. He stepped down, rifle in one hand, Hazel's blood still wet on the other. "This ends here," he growled. The men laughed, until Hazel sat up in the wagon, rifle braced against her good shoulder. "He told you," she said, voice weak but unshaken. "I'm his wife, or his war." And then she pulled the trigger. What followed wasn't a battle. It was a reckoning. Dust and blood and cries tore through the canyon. Owen fought with the fury of a man who had nothing left to lose. Hazel fired until her strength gave out, and when the smoke cleared, the last man standing was Owen. Barely. He staggered to Hazel's side, lifted her once more. She was alive, but only just. And he knew they couldn't go back. Not to the ranch, not to Dry Creek, but maybe, just maybe, they could go forward. And so they did. But where they went, and who they became, would defy everything the West believed about love, justice, and the cost of becoming free. 3 months later, a woman stood behind the counter of a schoolhouse in a town with no sheriff. Her name was Hazel Nightingale. She wore a faded blue dress and a small scar beneath her collarbone, just visible when she tilted her chin to correct a student's grammar. Her voice carried the weight of someone who had bled for silence and earned the right to speak. Beside her, on the blackboard, chalked in careful print, were words the children copied without fully understanding. Freedom is not given. It is taken and kept. In a nearby field, Owen tended to the horses of the school, quiet, watchful. He didn't wear his gun anymore, not openly, but he kept it clean and close. People asked where they came from. They answered only what mattered. "We've seen enough to know what justice costs," Owen once told the mayor, "and what it's worth." The man nodded. Didn't ask again. They lived in a cabin outside the town limits. Small, warm, built with bare hands and shared pain. There was lavender by the windows again. Hazel planted it herself, said it reminded her of the porch where she first said yes without saying the word. Owen carved their names again, this time not into wood, but into the gate. Nightingale. No first names, just legacy. Some nights, Hazel would wake with a tremble, dreams of gunfire and betrayal still haunting her. Owen would pull her close, say nothing, and hold her until morning. Other times, it was he who needed the stillness. When the ghosts came back dressed as brothers, when the silence reminded him of lost battles, they healed together, slowly, honestly. And then, one spring morning, as wildflowers returned to the fields, Hazel walked out with a bundle in her arms. Not a rifle, not a ledger, but a child, wrapped in white, eyes wide like the prairie sky. "He's got your fire," Owen said, touching the baby's cheek. "And your fight," Hazel smiled. They named him Elias, not for the man who betrayed them, but for what the name meant in another language. "The Lord is my strength." Redemption had found them not in vengeance, but in choosing to love anyway. Hazel never forgot the day she was sold like cattle, but she also never forgot the day a man looked at her and said, "Mine or war." And in the end, she learned she had always belonged to herself first. If this story stirred something in your heart, subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments. What would you fight for, no matter the cost? Your voice matters here.